Hello there and welcome to this special episode of Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. This is the third episode in a series of 8 where Mr. David Stephan, VP of Truehope Canada, and I take you on a step-by-step journey through this company's incredible history. I want you to please note that this episode is quite lengthy, it's comprehensive, it's detailed, so you may want to consider breaking it down into 2, 3, or even 4 sessions. But please sit back, relax, enjoy the Truehope Family Files Part 3, Tragedy Strikes Again. Enjoy the show.
Millions of Canadians do it every day, take some sort of natural health product. In fact, close to 3/4 of us take vitamins. But some fear their access to supplements and minerals could be restricted if the Harper government passes Bill C-51. As Global's Elle Sweeney explains, many wonder if government regulations is really the right remedy.
People who take their vitamins, minerals, and health food supplements and take them seriously are now taking on the federal government, telling the government to keep its hands off their health.
We want natural health care.
Hundreds rallied and marched in Toronto, in Edmonton, and Vancouver to fight federal legislation called Bill C-51 that would put new regulations on health supplements.
An example of things like vitamin C, things like cod liver oil, things that are readily available in stores at the moment will become unavailable and available by prescription only.
They say the government's bill is not clear, but fear that it would mean Canadians have to go to a doctor to get a prescription for vitamins and buy them at a drugstore.
You know, digestive enzymes, sort of like parasite and yeast, like liver detox.
Angela Chitali is a naturopathic doctor who probably wouldn't be able to write those prescriptions. She says the bill would restrict health supplements for a lot of people who rely on them.
For preventative measures, for treatment measures, they often fill in the gaps where, you know, a pharmaceutical may not be helping.
And opponents of the legislation suspect there's another agenda going on. They say it could give drug companies control of a booming vitamin and supplement market worth around $2 billion a year. Federal Health Minister Tony Clement says his legislation is just trying to protect Canadians. He says it will weed out what he calls the bad guys in the industry, and says other natural health products are going to thrive. But the people who rely on that industry say natural remedies have been working for hundreds and even thousands of years and don't need the government control. Elle Sweeney, Global News, Toronto.
Okay, hi everybody. Welcome back to the Truehope Family Files, an 8-part special series here on Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. Last week, in part 2, we titled it The Heavy Hand of Health Canada. Today, we jump into part 3, Tragedy Strikes Again. If you've yet to listen to part 1 and part 2, I highly suggest you do that so you can get up to speed and continue on this journey with us. But we've got Mr. David Stephan back with us again, and he's going to take us through the incredible details of this Truehope story. Good afternoon, David. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Simon. How are you doing?
I am wonderful. Yeah, I'm excited to get back into the story, back into the Truehope Family Files here. And as we finished off part 2 discussing Bill C-51 and the attempt of Health Canada to establish quite draconian powers within the natural health food industry, and we just saw a 2-minute clip there of protesters not too happy with that decision. Do you think you can perhaps reintroduce this to us as we go from part 2 into part 3 as a little bit of a segue?
Absolutely. So last week we ended off on talking about how there was protests across the country in every major city, really, about this Bill C-51 that was really going to give Health Canada some significant draconian powers to basically decimate the natural health industry. Now, many people are saying, well, they won't really do that. But unfortunately, we already had other countries to model after, to look at what had happened there, including Australia, New Zealand, and the crisis that they were in at that point in time with their natural health industry. I think things have kind of turned around due to pressure. I haven't kept my thumb on the pulse there, but I do know there was a time when you would go into a health food store in Australia and you would find barren shelves because there just wasn't products available. And so the industry was really concerned about it going the same way. And they were writing into legislation all the powers that they would have needed to make that happen. And you don't ask for the keys for a Ferrari unless you're wanting to drive it. And so the government was asking for all these powers, or basically demanding them and saying, trying to push them through Parliament so that they could use them, not so that they had them at access, when something happened that they maybe perhaps wanted them. No, they were planning to use that power to do something. And really the only power the only thing that would have allowed them to do was legitimately decimate the natural health industry in relation to anything that was deemed therapeutic. It would become licensable. So this would have actually even affected just, everyday individuals who are growing garlic in their garden, and all of a sudden garlic's deemed a therapeutic because why? It's therapeutic. And all of a sudden it now becomes a licensable product that the seeds would have to require a license, that you may have to even end up with a license to grow it in your garden, right? Or that it's just removed from the market because, well, it's a therapeutic, so now it's under a different classification. Basically, it was so ambiguous in relation to how it was drafted up that it would have granted them the ability to do all sorts of incredibly draconian things, and they would have had the authority to do it, including like raids on domiciles and all that type of stuff, which we were already understanding that they had done that a few times previous, and now they were just looking to write it into law so that they could do it more so. So there were some concerns there.
Unbelievable. Yeah. And I remember reading Sean Buckley's discussion paper a couple of years back discussing new bills coming in 2024. And he was discussing the fact that 80% of Canadians use natural health products, which is an incredibly large amount of individuals. And I would argue that number is more towards 90% now, considering we've seen, medical interventions pushed on the public that have caused, lots of serious conditions and illnesses for a lot of people, pushing people more towards a natural approach rather than having to rely on pharmaceutical medication. So it's very interesting just doing that video, which was from, when was that video from that we just saw?
That would have been from 2008 when Bill C-51 was, when the protests were at the height of the protests, which was 2008. And it would have been around that same time, shortly after that video that we watched, that news clip, that they would have scrapped the bill. We were fortunately victorious, but there were some things that were concerning that led up to us being victorious. It was no small battle by any means, outside of the natural health community as well as within the natural health community, which is interesting because you think that you would have found a unified front in the natural health community. It wasn't there. It wasn't to be found.
Yeah, quite remarkable scenes that we've certainly seen over the last few years when it comes to choice and natural health products aside. There's been many other conflicts that we've seen that people have been put under a lot of pressure when it comes to their ability to make decisions for themselves, for their families. And I think during that 2-minute video, the news reporter alluded to the fact that the natural health industry is worth $2 billion annually. And this is many years ago. So it has to be more and more now. And at the end of the day, I think if you think of it from a business standpoint, from big pharma, that's money that could be in their pocket, whether that's 10% of that 2 billion, 50% of that 2 billion, 100% of that 2 billion. People are going to the natural health food stores rather than going to the doctor and getting a prescription. And that's, has to be seen as competition. And we absolutely know about the pressures from these types of industries to government to therefore put in legislations and bills that forces the hands of a lot of these alternative natural health companies. So it's really quite a insidious, dark pressure that it comes from. A lot of people might just stop and think, oh, it's just the government who are doing these things. Sure, they're enforcing it, but like, where are these incentives coming from? Where are these pressures coming from? What's the real game that's afoot?
Well, I think we need to look at it from a broader perspective too. I mean, you talk about, let's say hypothetically that, the natural health industry in Canada is 4 or 5 billion now, factoring in inflation and all that type of stuff, as well as the growth that has taken place as people have been seeing what's taken place within allopathic medicine and naturally being turned away from it and wanting to take control of their health more, empower themselves by, grabbing the bull by the horns, if you will, and saying, hey, this is my body. I'm going to take control of it. I'm going to make sure, like I've got the biggest vested interest in it being healthy. I'm going to get natural health products rather than, trusting what my doctor had to say. So let's say that it's much larger. Now you alluded to that particular portion. Let's say it's 5 billion that, the pharmaceutical industry is maybe looking at that and saying, we want a portion of that. It goes beyond that. Because when it stands at competition, when the natural health community stands at competition with the pharmaceutical industry, it isn't just that the pharmaceutical industry is maybe losing $5 billion profit to the natural health community. The profits don't align at all, not one bit. Because let's say that somebody was consuming Empower Plus, and as such, they're feeling wonderful. They once were plagued, let's say, with bipolar disorder, but now they're feeling really great. And they don't need medications, and they're living life the way they want to, and it's costing them about $60 to $70 per month. Like that's pretty minimal. What that actually equates to, if you were to remove Empower Plus from the market and people didn't feel that they had another alternative, so instead they go get on a bottle of Paxil, let's say. Well, the cost of that is going to be more like $300 per month. So even though because it's patented and because it's subsidized, it's socialized medicine here in Canada, and so it's not going to cost the individual $300 per month, right? Or $350 or whatever. I don't know what it is now. I remember the original breakdown years ago. This is well over a decade ago, that it was costing them like dimes to make this stuff, and yet legitimately it's being sold for over $300 per bottle.
Right.
And so you've got this major, profit margin there. And so extremely profitable. And so now when you have somebody who is doing something natural versus allopathic, it's a significant profit loss. That 5 billion, let's say, if that's what it was for the natural health community, if you were able to shift everybody over from the natural health community over to allopathic medicine, that 5 billion would translate to more like, 25 billion, 50 billion, something like that, something significant, because the astronomical cost difference in relation to the medicine that's coming through allopathy versus the counterpart that you would find within nature that is not patentable is coming at a significantly reduced cost. So it's not, if it was 2 billion back then, it's not 2 billion they're looking at it. If we were to translate that into the profits, if they were taking pharmaceutical medications, it skyrockets that profit margin, like profitability overall. It's not 2 billion. It is like way more, like, 5-10 times the amount.
Yeah.
So they're seeing it through a little bit different lens, that when they're coveting the profits, they're not coveting the profits per se, they're coveting the clients, and those clients are going to end up on much more costly medicine because it's patented and because they can get away with it because it's socialized and monopolized through the government.
Absolutely. And when you're looking at a natural health product, I think there are many examples where you can actually prevent, treat, and heal a lot of disorders. But when you're looking at like a pharmaceutical medication, somebody who's on one for a long period of time, we all know they come with side effects, which is likely going to lead to other medications, which is just like more products on more products. And I guess being, executives in pharmaceutical industry, they have to recognize that the majority of customers, people on drugs, are going to end up being on 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 in some cases. I don't know what the average amount of pharmaceuticals let's say a 75-year-old person takes in Canada these days, but it has to be more than 2 or 3 to deal with the side effects of being on these drugs for probably a couple of decades. So yeah, it's you say bigger picture stuff. It's a lot of money. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of pressures coming from all angles, and that's why we see governments attempting to push through legislation that we really, when you look at the grand scheme of things, like it's not serving the people, it's not serving their interests, their freedoms, their ability to make choices for themselves. Before 2004, there weren't any natural health regulations, and there weren't bodies piled up in natural health food stores. It was the Wild West out there. And I know Sean Buckley talks a lot about that as well with his work with the NHPPA. But let's continue on this timeline here. So we're into 2008 now. And what's going on with Truehope, and you can probably slip that into what's going on with Bill C-51 as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Truehope is thriving. We had just come out of the court case 2 years before that. We were kind of experiencing a sense of peace, except for the fact that we were proactively pursuing a lawsuit against Health Canada for what Health Canada had done to the Canadian public in their dangerous, reckless acts, if you will, that ultimately caused suicides that we had covered back in episode 2. They literally killed people, and they knew that they were going to cause harm and even death in what they were doing, but they did it anyways to try to fulfill their agenda. So we're doing well at Truehope, but we are taking Health Canada to task at this point in time. We have Bill C-51 emerge, and I know last time we ended off on a bit of a cliffhanger talking about that there was infiltrators within the natural health community that were actually working actively against us in relation to raising the alarm around Bill C-51, in relation to helping to incite protests all across Canada. What you'll find common theme throughout the entirety of the protests, when you look at, there's dozens of news clips out there that show what was taking place with those protests in different cities, you're going to see the same common branding. You're going to see the stop sign, stop C-51. Truehope was responsible for bringing that about. When we discovered what was taking place, my father called a late night meeting. All of the executive staff got together for Truehope, arrived at head office probably around 11 o'clock-ish. By the time 4 o'clock in the morning rolls around, we're all dispersing after we had come up with a game plan as to how each of us in our respective roles would be able to help contribute to this battle. And so we took this seriously. And I ended up doing video work and managing the social media to get it out there as to what was taking place. Social media was a little bit of a newer entity back then. So I was getting my feet wet with my first social media project at that point in time. And so that's what we were doing. We were taking it very serious, but we had a lot of people opposing us. And all of a sudden, out of the most unlikely of places, we would never have expected it to be within the ranks of the natural health community itself. But all of a sudden, we see this concerted effort to sideline us, to sideline what we were doing, and to shift the message that, no, we don't need to stop Bill C-51. No, we don't need to get rid of it. Let's amend it. Let's amend it. Really passive, let's just cater to what they're doing, but let's just get them to shift some of the wording in it because, we need this. Mm-hmm. And we're saying, wait a minute. No. You give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. Like you just don't open that door. Don't do it. We've already catered to their 2004 natural health product regulations, which was against all of the recommendations that were made within Parliament, within the community that was established in years previous to that. And so Health Canada was still operating outside of what was being recommended through the MPs, which is ultimately coming from feedback from the Canadian public. So Health Canada was out of line already, that they were not representing the needs and desires of the Canadian populace. And so we weren't going to let, cave more to what they were wanting, that now they're not asking for even more power because as if they didn't get enough in 2004, which ultimately led to the removal of a lot of products, which we will get to over time. But Canadians don't have access to nearly the amount of natural health products that they once would have had available to them on the health food store shelves. It's been a slow fade. It's taken place over the last decade and a half, but literally like a fraction of the amount. And so what we found is that the Canadian Health Food Association, the CHFA, they run the two biggest trade shows in all of Canada. They run the two biggest trade shows for the natural health community, where you'll have all of the vendors will come, all the manufacturers, and they'll set up the booths. You're going to have all the health food stores come in, and you're going to have other manufacturers involved in that as well, going around to the product manufacturers, soliciting their what they do, what services they have to offer with manufacturing vitamins, minerals, whatever, right? And so you have this big conglomeration, thousands and thousands of people get together in the Vancouver Trade Center, not Trade Center, the Convention Center, as well as in Toronto as well. The two largest shows that happen in Canada every year. Now, this organization is supposed to be protecting the natural health community from Health Canada. So they're kind of like the middleman that represents, almost like an elected official, if you will. They're supposed to be representing the natural health community and going to Health Canada and saying, look, no, we're not going to stand for this. And so basically they're getting all this membership money to protect their members. Well, what we found is that they were the ones that came out with this whole plan, and they actually stole our marketing, all of the stuff that we had done, and tried to hijack it. And all of a sudden you see stop signs that say, rather than stop, it says amend. Like, that doesn't even make sense. Yeah, sure, it's somewhat close to the French word arrête, right? Like, no, it's not. It starts with an A. That's the only thing. So it made no sense. All of a sudden you have amend on a stop sign and it says amend C51. So they literally, when you glance at it, it had the same branding that we had established, but yet it has a shifted message. So they were literally trying to take all of the people that we had convinced that this is really bad, get rid of it. And they were trying to take them and sideline them and basically make it look like, oh, it's not stop, it's amend, and sideline them into a different message, a different mode of action that was ultimately going to allow Health Canada to still have these powers, but just, some of the verbiage would be changed or removed. Well, there was an individual in our organization, and I would list his name, except he wants to remain anonymous, and I don't blame him, that did some digging. And he dug into this, and what he found is that Agri-Food Canada, another government organization closely related to Health Canada, had been funding the CHFA through the back door to the tune of, the numbers vary now. I mean, we're 16 years out from this now, but my recollection is that it was $750,000. The number I received the other day when I was following up with this was about $1.5 million. I'm going to go with the more conservative number, and based on my memory is typically pretty good, that it was about $750,000 had been backdoored to the CHFA through Agri-Food Canada. And so here they're receiving money from government, but yet they're supposed to be protecting the industry from government. And so this information is released. We go public on it. And literally, within a very short period of time after this scandal was the lid was popped off the scandal, Penny Moret, the president of the CHFA, stepped down, resigned over the whole catastrophe, because they'd been caught with their pants down. They'd been caught with the fact that they were in bed with the government that they were supposed to be protecting the whole industry from. And so here you have this organization that's displaying elements of corruption, that they're playing both sides of the fence, and they can only serve one master. And if they're getting a bunch of money from the industry, from the natural health community, but yet they're also getting money from the government, and it's maybe a little bit more promising and a little easier to get that money from the government, who are you going to serve? So what we see is this dumbed down message where they literally are trying to dissuade the whole industry from following in step with Truehope, because we were the ones leading the charge, and to turn their backs on us. We had been listed as radicals. We were way out there. We're just, don't align with them, align with us. And they had all of the major players on board. We see Alive magazine publishing articles on it and advertisements, Amend C51. We started seeing our marketing material, our branded marketing material, but with Amend as backdrops in the health food stores behind the desks and stuff like that. They basically turned the whole industry on us. And there was very few that were willing to take the bold stand. But fortunately, we had the head start, because we were the first to alarm the industry of what was going on. And as such, we were able to have success. But we got to see that there were some dirty players, some plants, if you will, or infiltrators in the natural health community that were there to basically point people in the wrong direction. And we still see the same thing today, which Sean speaks about, I've spoken about in relation to CHFA as well. We won't want to fast forward there yet, because that's, I think, episode 8 that we're going to cover that. Maybe that's episode 7, one of the two. But I'm sure we'll be covering that. But we got to see back then that those that were supposed to be protecting us were actually working against us and trying to dumb down everybody that would be affected by this really terrible legislation, and to get them to just readily accept it with some minor changes.
Yeah, I think the CHFA, that it's a very interesting organization, which I believe would have been founded with very, very good intention. But we see these like middle organizations between the government and the people, often captured in many, many different industries. And, obviously money talks, and there's actual evidence of this money coming from the government into this organization, which would obviously highly conflicting, and CHFA has so much impact within the industry, so much trust that's been built up, because there is a lot of amazing individuals within the natural health community, a lot of wonderful, trusting individuals, and the actions are just incredibly suspicious from the CHFA. And we'll get into it in future episodes, but we're seeing it still today in 2024. And if that organization there, being that middleman between the government and the people, is there to protect the individuals and give the individuals maximum opportunity to choose natural options for their health, but these regulations even back then would be absolutely disastrous for the whole industry. Even with minor tweaks or amendments to what's being proposed, it's such a controversial, weak stance to take against a tyrannical regime. So it just screams. I'm so skeptical about their intentions, and it's quite wild that even in 2024 we're still seeing them having this huge impact, when we've seen that they've received funding from the primary agency that they're supposed to be, let's just say, supposed to be combative with, to protect the people.
And had this legislation gone through back in 2008, I promise you this, and this is what every Canadian needs to be aware of, is that we would be looking at an entirely different landscape in relation to the natural health industry that's in Canada right now.
Oh yeah.
And it would be very, very dismal. So if the audience watching this, if you consume natural health products today, you need to be grateful for the fact that there was a lot of warriors that were still willing to take a stand, and that there was organizers, like we see Brett Hawes there, and he's still a fantastic warrior. He was in that news clip there, and his voice is just so distinct. Like, I've done podcasts with him in the past, been in meetings with him and stuff like that. And, as soon as I hear his voice, even though he's not visually represented in the video yet, it's him. Yeah. But, people like him and others across Canada that were willing to organize these protests and to take this bold stand, because had that not taken place, had the alarm not been sounded, we would be in a much different situation today, and you might not be enjoying the natural health products that you have access to today. So it's really, we need to put that in context here, that there has been a vested interest from the powers that be to remove access to supplements that would empower you. What they're looking to do is remove choice, that you can empower yourself, but rather you're no longer empowered. You have to go to the doctor if you have some manifestation of disease. That's your only option. And that's been, part of the agenda since day one of Rockefeller medicine coming out back in the earlier 1900s. And we saw that they decimated homeopathy. They decimated naturopathy back then. And it wouldn't be till, like the 90s that actually started to make a comeback. But they literally decimated. The only thing that actually survived the purge initially was chiropractic. But it still came under fire. Yeah. It's still under fire today. If you go and do some searches online, you're going to find all sorts of quackery sites citing chiropractic as quackery. Well, it's pretty tangible. You go in, maybe sometimes you're feeling garbage. You come out, you feel pretty good. Can't chalk that all up to placebo. There were some legitimate physical adjustments taking place there to incite that reinvigoration, if you will. So
absolutely. So we come a little bit further forward in the story now. Like BC 51 was scrapped. That was a victory back then. We're seeing the battle resuming today, but that will be for a future episode. Where are we in regards to Truehope in the 2008, 9, 10 era?
Yeah, so we're still fighting the battle. We consider that a victory, the fact that they scrapped that bill. They actually tried to resurrect it again under Bill C6, I think, in the next, because Parliament was prorogued, so the whole thing got disappeared. They brought it back. It got scrapped, which was a good thing. So there was actually a couple battlefronts there, a little bit of a tumultuous time. But then, we get into a peaceful situation where it's like, okay, there's no battles to be fought other than we're going to continue to fight, or to pursue this lawsuit. The initial lawsuit was lost. There was some real corruption associated with that court case, like significantly, actually. Sean Buckley is representing I'm sure he could comment on it to a much greater degree than I'm able to. But let's just say that I think it left him shooken, if you will, in relation to what was taking place in the judiciary and the grand level of corruption there, to allow for Health Canada to get away with these egregious actions that legitimately caused or cost Canadians their lives. They like anybody else would have been charged criminally for criminal negligence resulting in death, for doing what Health Canada did, and yet no criminal charges against any of the agents, no successful lawsuits, and so they were able to get away with it. But it became more egregious. We appealed it, and then the appeal was lost, and then to boot, to add insult to injury, then we were stuck with paying a portion of Health Canada's legal fees. So we got stuck with a $150,000 bill on top of the fact that we had just spent all this time and money and resources fighting on behalf of the Canadian public to ensure that Health Canada wasn't able to go and kill people anymore without being held accountable. And so now we're stuck with the bill. And so my dad pushed that back and paid it off as slowly as possible. I mean, if he could have gotten away with it, he would have just, I'm sure, lack of better, he would have stuck it to them and just said, go away, right? Like, you guys are criminals, including the judiciary, those who were involved in allowing this egregious action to take place, because it was a very strong case, very strong lawsuit. We had legal standing, and we had a clear-cut case, and yet we were sidelined, and all to protect Health Canada and to protect the agents so that they can continue to feel protected in harming Canadians, right? When in reality, you'd think that Health Canada agents would be there to look out for the health of Canadians. And so we're stuck with the $150,000 bill, and we're just left shaking our heads saying, wow, this is so incredibly dirty, like so dirty.
Yeah, just the fact that Health Canada knew 100% that stopping this product from getting into the hands and bodies of Canadians was going to end some of their lives is just, it's just unbelievable to think that the judiciary system would not take action against that. It's, it's obviously they're trying to take care of their own and not turn this into a huge big thing, because obviously if the result of that case would have gone the other way and Health Canada were like hugely liable for these actions, then this would be global news. It would be absolutely huge. And I'm convinced that they had those conversations that if this was to go that way, this would happen, and Health Canada and a large government agency would be in serious trouble. So I'm sure phone calls were made and pressure was placed on, because we know what money and pressure does. And yeah, we see a quite remarkable result in this appeal, and actually leaving you guys with a massive bill to be paid as well is quite remarkable. And then we step into, I think it's 2011, and there's quite a significant change within Truehope itself.
Yeah, at that point in time, so from 1996 to the year 2011, there's a partnership between my father and David Hardy, and they really brought a lot of balance to each other. My father being very ambitious and, hey, let's go take care of this now, right? Like, oh, there's a fight to be fought. Let's get him, right? Right? He's taken that stance, right? He's got just the fire in him and the passion. And David Hardy is quite reserved, and so there was quite a symbiotic relationship there, if you will, where there was a balance brought and whatnot, so that David Hardy would sometimes rein my father in a little bit, slow him down. My father would have to drag him along sometimes, say let's do this, right? And hence why I mentioned last episode about the phone calls that had been made to Health Canada agents when we found out that they were going to drop the charges. My father made phone calls saying, hey, we're really excited you guys are dropping the charges, because he didn't want them to drop the charges, by the way. He wanted to take this to court, but he said, hey, we're excited that you're dropping the charges, because we're going to sue you personally as soon as we're out of court. As soon as all is done, we're suing you personally. And so he did that with all the Health Canada agents that were involved with this egregious actions against the Canadians. And what it caused Health Canada to do was not drop the charges, and they were going to continue to come at us because, they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. They might as well proceed forward and avoid the personal lawsuits, because if they won, then there's no grounds for lawsuits, because it shows that we were in the wrong in the first place. How can you sue somebody, an agent, for acting appropriately?
Right.
But they didn't win. So that's why then the lawsuit continued on. So David Hardy was not aware of those phone calls that were going to be made, because he was really quite happy over the fact that the charges were going to be dropped. Whereas my father said, no, we have to let this go to court. We have to have our day in court. And so, but there was balance aside from that. But sometimes, certain things like that had to take place to guide the course. And so by 2011, there was enough of a chasm between them in relation to what the vision and mission of the whole company, the whole, how we operated, everything. There was conflict as to who we should be catering to, what was our mission, what we should actually be doing, who we should be helping, that type of thing. And as such, a split took place, where David Hardy and his sons and whoever was involved with that aspect of the business would go and attempt to become more corporate, if you will, where they would now cater to dealing with large corporations and helping us, kind of going into the HR program, in getting supplements into very, very large multinational corporations to, increase the cognition and performance of their staff, which is really it's a nice business model, especially given the studies that we have that show that you take Empower Plus and you generally become smarter. Your brain starts to work better. You're not clouded with all of these emotional issues, with these mood, with mood dysregulation, all that type of stuff. All of a sudden you're operating at a higher level. And so it would make sense from a business standpoint. I know if I was running a large organization, I would be making sure that, based on the knowledge I have, that all of my staff would be getting the Empower Plus. Even though we're paying for it as an organization, they're the benefactors in their personal lives. We're the benefactors in their increased performance. And so that's actually, as you're well aware, working with me, that we actually do supply our own staff with product free of charge. Why? So that they're healthier, so that they do better, so that they have their own personal stories to tell about it as they're working in their respective roles within Truehope, but also so that they perform better. So really, us giving that gift, we're actually the benefactors as well as them. We're joint benefactors in the fact that we're supplying that. So that's where they wanted to go. My father wasn't really wanting to divest from what we had been doing traditionally in relation to, specifically working with individuals, broken families, like what our family had gone through. And that's really where my dad's heart was. That's where a lot of us as a family, that's where our hearts were, because we went through it personally, right? Our mother took her life, right? Out of all the siblings, 9 siblings here, 8 of my siblings, right? So 9 of us total. We lost our mother, and we lost her to suicide. We lost our grandfather. We lost him to suicide. We ourselves were struggling with mental health conditions. No longer were we struggling with that. So that's really where our hearts were, was to help the end user, that, your everyday individual, right? Rather than just specifying our actions towards helping people increase their cognition within a corporate setting, right? So there was a separation that took place that eventually, over the months, would end up in a full division of the business. And so we kept the Truehope brand, we kept the original products, and they went on to reformulate. So at that point in time, you end up with 2 entities. You end up with Truehope maintaining, the intellectual property on all the products that we already had, and then they went on and reformulated their own products and all that type of stuff, and went down the road that they're going down, right? And so there's a split, and as such, there's major shifting taking place in the business. We had been establishing at that point in time the retail division, which is all the bottles that you see behind me here. The retail division that was going to then start working through health food stores, because at this point in time, we weren't working through health food stores. In fact, a lot of the battles that we had taken on in the previous decade, like the Bill C-51, wasn't going to negatively impact us as much as it would the standard manufacturer out there and the standard health food store owner. And we had no business with them. Like legitimately, we had no business with them. We were selling direct to consumer out of the States. And so as long as the product was allowed to flow across the border still, there was no issue for us. But we just saw what was going to take place in relation to the removal of rights. And so we took a stand for it because we had already had our rights compromised in the past, and we had no tolerance for it, if you will. But now, here we are, 2010, 2011, we're starting to lay the groundwork for the retail division to get it into health food stores. By 2011, we're starting to roll it out. So that's when I started traveling. Initially, I was playing a couple roles because at that point in time, I had been, doing marketing, sales training, and that type of thing within head office. I had shifted roles. I'd been doing video work for many years at that point in time, and I thought, you know what, I need to get back into a sales role. I need to talk with people. I need to work with people rather than work behind a computer or find myself behind a camera, right? So I started to play that role for a few years at that point in time, and so I started to play a dual role where I had an office out of head office for overseeing all the marketing, which at that point in time we hadn't really been doing any marketing. There was no marketing department until I established it in, I think, 2009 or 2010. I established a marketing department. Up until then, we had no marketing department. Everything that all of our business, all of the advertising was done over the fact that the news would cover us every time a new study would come out. They would cover it. And so all of a sudden we're getting an influx of people phoning us. Or the Discovery Health documentary, which came out in September of 2002, that was put into 50 different countries, translated into multiple languages. That was really our marketing, and it wasn't ours. It was merely the news and broadcasting companies sharing this incredible discovery. But unfortunately, a documentary only has a certain shelf life. Eventually, right, it wears off, and they stop playing it. And unfortunately, things would begin to shift with the news as well at around the year 2010. So at that point in time, I'm playing two roles. I'm traveling as well as I'm in head office when I'm not traveling. And so it was kind of a fun little, one leg on each side of the fence, working with corporate, Truehope corporate, as well as the retail division, as we're seeing if it's even viable to get it out there. And obviously, as you can see today, it is viable. And we've got, 6 products now, 6 life-changing products that are available in retail stores. And eventually we're going to continue to roll out more, but not too many more, only the ones that are the most potent and life-changing. But it was a real interesting time, if you will. A lot of shifts, a lot of tumult, really a reformation, if you will, being that we just lost, half of our team players to Hardy Nutritionals being established.
Yeah, it's an interesting split that the company took, and I totally understand Anthony's perspective on going forward and where his mission and his goals come from obviously from the tragic beginnings of Truehope, and how David Hardy wanted to take it in a different direction. I think that there's probably a very healthy split between the two of them, and they had such a great relationship. And very interesting that, like, before Truehope even had a marketing department, all the marketing was done by the media, who was clearly interested in these wonderful studies and research and stories of people taking Empower Plus and recovering from very, very serious conditions, because that's unbelievably newsworthy. And then, yeah, as you say, 2010, something shifted within the media, and the studies weren't being publicized on the TV anymore. Researchers weren't being interviewed. Very, very interesting how and why that shift happened. And it's 2012 when a really great study comes out from the University of Canterbury, which I'll bring up now for you if you want to take us through this. This is research done on PTSD and earthquake survivors, which is very interesting. I'm just going to bring this up now for those who are watching. You'll be able to see this. It's titled "Shaken but Unstirred." Yeah, David, if you want to take us through this a little bit, this research paper, which, as I said, was done by I think the lead researcher there is Julia Rutledge. And do you want to take us through this?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. It's a first of its kind study, and the reason being is that you can't so easily predict when an earthquake's going to happen. And it takes time typically for all the protocols to be established for a study, getting all the resources available. And so this really happened kind of serendipitously, if you will, that Julia Ruckledge out of the University of Canterbury, out of Christchurch, New Zealand, was getting ready to do a double-blind placebo-controlled trial on the Empower Plus when the earthquake happened in February of 2011, if I recall appropriately. And now this was a devastating earthquake. Many people remember this, especially if you lived in New Zealand, you would have remembered this, especially if you lived in Christchurch. It devastated the place. There was a lot of destroyed infrastructure. There was nobody in that city that was left unaffected. It impacted everybody in so many aspects of life. And now it wasn't just a single earthquake, though, because the problem is that it was almost every day thereafter for quite some time, there was aftershocks, tremors. So now imagine this. Imagine you just went through a traumatic event that literally like just tore down buildings around you and stuff like that, and you survive it. But your life is just like broken in a sense, and everybody's having to find themselves in a rebuilding state. So you have the initial trauma. But then imagine you have that reminder every day and you're thinking, my golly, like, is this going to be the next earthquake? And then there was another one, not too terribly long after, another about 7.0. And so now they're living in this situation where it's just like continual reminder of devastation and on edge of thinking, is there going to be a bigger one that's just going to just finish everything off, right? And so this is a situation that a lot of people are living in, right? According to Julia Ruckledge, she's talking about it. She's living there. She's living it herself. So she has a study ready to go. So what she does is she has all the protocols, everything in place, ready to execute the study. She morphs it. She shifts it over to be a post-earthquake study to study the effects that nutrition has on people that have just gone through a cataclysmic event, right? To see how they do if they're on nutrition versus not on nutrition. And what she found was really astounding, right? Just to kind of sum it up, to break it down, those that were on the Empower Plus found that they had far less stress, less anxiety, less depression, all these things that would naturally accompany this type of situation. They did much better than those that didn't have the Empower Plus. And then I believe she did a comparative analysis in this particular study where she used another product that was coming from Bayer, Pharmaceuticals. Well, they had purchased this multivitamin supplement called Baroka. And the Baroka was already proven to be quite beneficial for stress. So she had access to that. So she was studying some people on that particular supplement. And Bayer had actually come out with the statement saying, out of everything we have, like, this is our most effective treatment for stress. And it's multivitamin mineral. And here Bayer has all of these pharmaceuticals available, and yet their multivitamin is the best. And so she did a comparison, and what she found is that while people were in the study, they were more than twice as likely to report the positive findings on the Empower Plus versus the Bayer's Baroka. And then after the study, and this is a huge telling factor right here, that those that were on the Empower Plus were 5 times more likely to continue taking the Empower Plus versus those that were on the Bayer's Baroka. Now that tells you something, because now they're purchasing it out of pocket. They're continuing on with it after the fact. And so they clearly observed the significant life changes from taking the Empower Plus through the rebuilding stages after a traumatic event. And so really quite a phenomenal study, if you will, that should have generated the attention of a lot of people. And it's a very credible study. And then it would be replicated a couple years later out of High River in relation to a flood that took place. Well, here's what's interesting. The study comes out. It's the biggest, best study that is now been done on Empower Plus. We're excited about it. And traditionally, the media had always covered this type of stuff. Like, previous to that, in the late 2000s, they come out, you see, people, suffering with autism now have, New Hope type of thing, like talking about the headlines like this, right? Talking about the research that was done on Empower Plus. Well, all we hear is crickets. Nobody's willing to pick it up. And this is where it gets interesting. Nobody's willing to pick it up. Nobody seems to want to pick it up. either in the alternative news or the mainstream media. And we're just thinking, why? Like, this is like groundbreaking information that, yeah, obviously it counters the pharmaceutical industry significantly. So if they're purchasing advertising through the media, or if there's other buyouts taking place, if there's other payouts taking place, then we might not get any traction through the mainstream media. But for the alternative media to avoid it as well, even though we had done some reaching out, is just really shocking. Because, I mean, this helps establish the need for alternative medicine, that your best modalities to get through life storms, broken relationships, losses, deaths, that type of thing, Empower Plus, and yet no coverage. And so we were a little shocked by that. But fortunately, we had already started our marketing department, so we were able to get some traction with it. Not nearly as much as we should have been able to, but we were able to get some traction with it, and get it out in front of some people that could really benefit from the evidence that came forward from that in relation to PTSD, stress, anxiety, depression during cataclysmic events.
Yeah, I think if this paper had come out a few years prior, then there would have been some really big news stories wrapped around it. I'm sure of that fact. And I just want to give people a bit of an understanding around what happens in a very stressful situation. And obviously trauma and stress is different for everybody. Like the worst thing that's happened to you, or the most stressful thing that's happened to you, is the most stressful thing that's happened to you as an individual. That might be being in an earthquake and losing your house, your partner passes away, or your cat passes away, like that might be the most traumatic thing to you. And your body, your nervous system primarily is going to switch from let's just say a calm, restful state into a stressful, alert state. And if you're in that state for a long period of time, your body is just ripping apart for nutrients and minerals and vitamins and antioxidants to function at a higher level, because it perceives significant stress in your environment. And that may just be the case in some situations. But without replenishing those ingredients with a product like Empower Plus, your body is going to significantly struggle and be playing catch up for a long period of time. And you can consume the best foods in the world, but like if you're still in that stressful state within your nervous system, you're going to really, really struggle to get back to a homeostatic environment. And you think of these examples of a deer in nature, and it hears a twig in the background while it's grazing in the field, and it quickly switches into an alert state. Once it scans and figures out there's no threat there, it will just switch its nervous system back on and graze. And if there is let's just say a predator there, and there's a chase and the deer gets away, that deer will actually shake itself physically to get itself back into a normal nervous system environment, so it can actually continue to graze and it can continue to proliferate in life. But we as humans are a little bit more complicated than that, and we take our stress, we take our bad experiences, and we can relive them over and over again. And even if it happened to you 10 years ago and you imagine the breakup, or you imagine the earthquake, your body and brain don't really know the difference between it happening back then and it happening in real life. So your body will change into a completely stressed state. Again, your body will just rip for these nutrients and these vitamins. And again, it just makes total sense that during this incredible research and what foresight from Julia Rutledge to actually think about actually doing this in a practical way. It makes total sense to me that the individuals that were supplementing and providing their body with the necessary nutrients and vitamins and antioxidants to get through a stressful situation just goes to show to me that Empower Plus is a staple and a necessity for most people on a daily basis, because everyone deals with stress in very, very different ways, whether that's from a stressful boss in your environment, or just like lights and Wi-Fi and all these external stresses that we do have. This stress the body. You may not be able to see the frequencies that come in and dysregulate the body, but it happens every second of every day. So it's more important than ever now to supplement with the right product, to give your body the ability to shift correctly between these nervous systems, because you should never be in one or the other. It's a really beautiful balance, and the more equipped you are, the more resourceful, full you are, then you're going to have the ability to have this beautiful dance rather than being in one stressful state for long periods of time. And we see so many people dealing with that on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. I love the way that you put that when we end up in a stressful situation, that in order for our bodies to deal with it, there is a heightened level of production of different hormones and neurotransmitters. And literally we start ripping through nutrition. And the problem is that if we don't have the ability to get that nutrition, like you were saying, that we end up in that state for some time. But it can become quite a vicious cycle, because if we're still in that state and we're reliving it, and we see this oftentimes, especially accompanying mental health conditions, where literally you can't get out of the cycle of reliving it mentally. So you're actually reigniting that stressful situation every day, and your body doesn't know the difference. If it's being processed here, your body doesn't know the difference. It responds as if it's in that moment, even though you may be reliving a moment from 10 years ago. Boom, you've just enacted stress. And so now you end up in a vicious cycle unless you can remedy that somehow by putting in a substantial amount of nutrition, like we do with the Empire Plus initially, typically. Loading dose, boom. Symptoms go away, people start feeling better, their perspective changes, their thought processes change, and all of a sudden they can live less stressful because they're not sitting there ruminating on these issues over time. And there's one thing that I love to talk about as well, is when we're talking about trauma, oftentimes, and I've seen this numerous times, I don't just say trauma. I generally will accompany that with perceived trauma. Because here's what's interesting, going back to it, we can concoct something in our mind, or we can misperceive a particular situation and actually induce trauma within ourselves, and our body doesn't know any different, and it's all based on a misconception. And then as we sit there and cycle over and over and bring that memory up over and over and over, we will actually begin to morph that memory to turn an otherwise maybe even normal or just simple misunderstanding situation into a traumatic situation. Seen it way too many times, especially when we're stuck in a stressful mindset and we're not seeing through eyes clearly, if you will, or a clear perspective. There are a lot of people out there, and this is not to invalidate people, but there are a lot of people out there that are actually living in a state of perceived trauma, living with PTSD from a perceived event that actually didn't take place the way they think it took place. It's really, really quite interesting to see. But once we are able to pull ourselves out of that situation, once we're able to get our minds clear, we can reevaluate. And oftentimes people realize, whoa, the way I viewed the world, that's not the way that the world is. The way I viewed this particular individual, I vilified them. But yet, in essence, they were acting like a saint to me. They were actually, one of the best blessings I had in my life. And yet I vilified them through my mind, through my thought processes, and sitting there, right? So that's one aspect of this. And nutrient deficiency will help fuel that particular situation, because now the mind gets a little bit into that vicious cycle, and there needs to be an injection, if you will, right? An external injection of all of a sudden an abundance of nutrition, and it pulls them out of it. Suddenly they're producing adequate levels of dopamine and serotonin, and the paranoia is gone, or the depression's gone, or the dark feelings, which obviously will manifest in everything you view is now through a dark lens because of that particular situation you find yourselves in. So it's very important to recognize that nutrition is what helps carry us through and helps keep our minds clear while we navigate through the storms of life. Otherwise, we may find ourselves in a situation that we're reliving in our minds, and it's not helping us, and it's maybe not even entirely true to form.
Absolutely. And just when you talk about nutrient deficiency there, it makes me think of the times where I will have an anxious thought or a depressive thought, and the times where that thought will manifest into an emotion for me, which will change my physiology. That's times when I'm 100% nutrient deficient, when I've either not taken my supplements or I've overdone it in the day. 9 times out of 10, when I have like an anxious or a depressive thought, it will just stay there. It literally, the way I imagine it, it stays in my mind as a thought, and I'm able to process it because I literally have the ingredients within my brain to deal with it in that moment. But when I'm nutrient deficient, that can manifest itself into a deep emotional state for me. And I think we've all experienced the state when a thought turns into an emotion, and it changes your physiology. And it's really, really powerful, the power of thoughts. And if you don't have the requisite nutrition within your brain and body to, let's just say, deal with or digest or handle the inevitable anxiousness or depressiveness that comes with just being a human being. Yeah, if you don't have the resources available on a daily basis, sometimes a few times a day, you might need to take something depending on your circumstances. Yeah, I've got 2 young kids, so I need to keep up with my Empower Plus constantly. Yeah, things can spiral out of control very, very quickly. And when we're talking about trauma and the amazing earthquake PTSD study, I feel for a lot of people when they have a quite traumatic event, they struggle for a long period of time after that. And that event will lead them into being in a stressful state for long periods of time. And then they end up becoming just chronically nutrient deficient. So they're not just like nutrient deficient for a day, a week, or a month after that traumatic event, but that spirals out of control because they're in a stressful state, and anything they consume food wise is being turned into, let's say, stress hormones to deal with all of that. And then you end up, for people who have like year, 5 year, 10 years, 20 years, they've been nutrient deficient for that period of time. And then we obviously see during that time symptomology come up for people, and then they go to the doctor and they list off their symptoms, and they are then labeled with a pathology, and then there's obviously a drug to go with that pathology, rather than being like, let's hold things back, let's bring things back here a little, back to the root of like what have happened to you a long period of time ago. And I'm convinced the more I work with Truehope Canada, the more that I speak with individuals who take our products and have their lives changed, that the majority of conditions out there, especially psychological, are just significant nutrient deficiency.
And it's interesting, sometimes it's what came first, the chicken or the egg. And we have, after working with literally as a company, we've worked with well over 100,000 people. I think we're probably up around 250,000 people now over the last, we're coming on almost 30 years now. What's really interesting about that is oftentimes, we've seen where nutrient deficiency will lead to a mental illness, but we've seen where stressful situations or traumatic situations will actually be the catalyst for all of a sudden it's like a door opens and somebody enters into what you'd consider to be a clinically diagnosable mental illness. Like their life all of a sudden is different, right? We were working with one particular individual earlier on back in the late 90s who was struggling with schizophrenia for many, many years. And my father was personally working with this individual, and he actually came to stay at our house for a time. And this particular individual, normal life, high achiever, intelligent individual, going to university, and literally, now he's in university, he's studying, he's stressed, his diet is probably lousier than it was when he lived at home with his parents, right? Probably just, as a single student. But he's walking home one day, under this new form of stress that he's living under, and literally it's like he walked right through a wall. And he's now full-blown schizophrenic, hallucinations, all of it, like as about as deep as you go into schizophrenia. It was literally like a light switch flipped on, but it was based on the circumstances. And we've seen this many, many times to qualify it, where people will end up in these stressful situations, or they'll end up in a traumatic situation, and they just never come out of it the same. They end up with a diagnosable mental health condition. And so once again, that catalyst being the fact that you're burning through nutrition under a stressful situation. If you do not get that adequate amount of nutrition, which, even if somebody's eating organic today, and this is one of the things I cover in my presentations, is agriculture has changed so much, so much over the last 150 years, that we have to be, even when we're making healthy choices, we'd have to be eating like 6 times the amount, 5 to basically 8 times the amount, but the average around 6.5 times the amount that our great grandparents would have had to eat to get the same nutrient value out of the same food that they would have been consuming back then, right? So you can eat the same food. Maybe they had a spinach salad. Do you have a spinach salad today? 6.5 times the amount is what you would have to eat on average to get the same nutrient value that they would have gotten from one single serving.
Yeah, and we just see now, like the food on offer that people primarily go to is such nutrient poor food, and actually contains so many inflammatory foods as well. Like we see these horrific seed oils, and canola oil is in literally absolutely everything. And not only are you consuming nutrient poor food, but you're actually consuming inflammatory food, which is going to put your immune system and your digestive system and pretty much your whole body into an inflammatory state right away, even when we think we're nourishing our bodies with nutrition. So yeah, we're very, very far removed from the nutritional circumstances in which the human body is supposed to thrive. Quite remarkable. But we're going to shift gears a little bit here on this True Hope timeline. Things, after that University of Canterbury research is shared in 2012. Again, the media doesn't cover this because there's this clear shift in that 2010, 2011, 12 era. But things shift within True Hope, and things shift very much for you specifically within your family. So I think we're around February 2012 now within the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Can you take us there?
Yeah, for sure. So by about this point in time, it had been just over 2 months since I had stepped out of my position as the director of marketing for Truehope Corporate, and I went completely satellite, moved about an hour away from head office, and was solely working with the retail division and spending a lot of time on the road, about 3 to 4 days a week, every week, and just building this business, getting it off the ground, right? And February rolls around. We're settling into, the new house that we were in, whatnot, out in the boonies. We're out in rural Alberta, about half an hour from the closest town that has any amenities. And something happens, we're really dovetailing off of this trauma aspect, because I ended up going through the most traumatic event that I ever went through in my life, and I had been accustomed to loss in my life and trauma. Losing my mother at the age of 10 was significant, but now the tables are turned, and it goes, in a bit of a different direction. That as a parent, basically the worst thing that could ever happen to you takes place. So February 27th, it's a Monday, of 2012 rolls around, and at that point in time, I had still been going in for the odd meetings into Truehope corporate. So we're driving back an hour to where we had once lived, and I'm taking my wife and my 2 sons with me. And the reason being is I dropped them off at the school, and there's this really fantastic parent preschool resource available to them that they're accessing. And we're not public schoolers. We homeschool, but in relation to this, it was really fantastic, and it was really empowering for the mothers. The person who was heading this up was really well educated in relation to understanding children on a very deep level, and was empowering the mothers to be really better parents, if you will. And so I'm dropping my wife off at the school with my 2 sons, with Ezra, who at that point in time is 4 years old, and with Ezekiel, who is, a year and a half old. And I'm going and I'm meeting at Truehope with my father and with the executive team. And then, I'd go after the meeting and pick up my wife and children, again, my 2 sons, and we would then go to Lethbridge and do some shopping, right? Because we live an hour out from that. So it made for a perfect full day event for us. And so anyways, that particular day, before I got back to the school to pick them up, my wife had phoned me while I was still at the office, because my meeting went a little bit longer than their parent preschool had gone. And she phones me and just says, "Oh, Ezekiel's getting sick," which is out of the norm, right? Like, our kids would get the sniffle sometimes. They put themselves to bed a little bit early, wake up next day, fine. So she tells me that Ezekiel's coming down with something. And so I go and pick them up, no earlier than I normally would have, but my meeting concludes and I go pick him up, and we go to Lethbridge, and Ezekiel is, uncomfortable, right? And he's actually crying. And he's starting to develop this barky cough. And so anyways, it, by all indications, appears to be croup. And so, my wife does some quick, we only go to one store that day while I stayed in the vehicle with Ezekiel and Ezra, and she goes and grabs some groceries, and we end up going home. Well, I continue on with my business traveling and all that. And Ezekiel goes through the croup, as and by all indications, 4 days of it, solid. It appears to be croup. And so he goes through it and he comes out of it by about the weekend. And, things seem to be fine. And so the next week, same thing. I go to, actually, my wife and I were leaving the house at the same time, but I was going to Truehope to the meeting and then heading out to Lloydminster from there up north for a business trip. But so my wife was packing up at the same time. I helped her get everything ready, and we both left, but we left in separate vehicles because she's going to be going home and I'm going to be heading all the way to Lloydminster. And so anyways, they go to parent preschool again. So it's a week later, and Ezekiel isn't 100% better, as is, pretty normal. Like, one of these sicknesses will last 5-6 days, but then you'll have a little bit of residual. And so here we are, we're now on day 7 and he's not 100%, but he's back at parent preschool playing, and he'd been to church the day before and that type of thing. And so anyways, I go on this business trip, and it takes me all the way into not far, but what's considered northern Saskatchewan. You can't go far northern Saskatchewan without hitting the Canadian Shield, and there's nothing up there, even roads really. But we go into northern Saskatchewan, northeastern Saskatchewan, so we're quite a distance from my house, and we're doing this business trip, me and my brother, for a few days, and we're on our way back. And the day before I'm heading back, my wife phones me and just says, "Hey, I think he's actually getting sick again." I said, "Okay, like with what?" Right? She couldn't really identify it, but it just seemed like he's just taking a bit of a downturn. Okay, but he's not crying out in pain or anything at that point in time. Like the worst day was actually the first day when he first started coming down with the croup. That's when, like, as a parent, you're looking at it and saying he's visibly uncomfortable, he's crying, whereas other than that, he's just enduring it, right? So anyways, I get home on Thursday because we were on our way home anyways, and I picked up some remedies and all this type of stuff just to help with the immune system. And I get home on the Thursday and I look at him about midday and I said, "Well, it looks like he's getting the flu." Like when I walked into the room, he's sitting upright on the bed and he's watching a cartoon. And I'm like, but based on the way he's posturing himself, I'm like, it looks like he's getting the flu. He looks achy, like physically just looks uncomfortable, like that achiness that you get when you get in the flu. And so that's what I thought. So Friday rolls around and, nothing remarkable for changes, but he seems to be getting a little bit better. Saturday rolls around, he seems to be getting even better. Sunday rolls around and we're contemplating, do we take him to church, not to church? What do we do, right? Anyways, Sunday night rolls around and he starts to take a turn again and he's visibly uncomfortable. And my wife stays up with him. And at this point in time, she's 4.5 months pregnant, and this is relevant in just a moment. But so anyways, I go to this on the Monday morning. I sleep in the spare bedroom because I'm going to be up earlier than everybody else. I'm preparing to go to a county council meeting in relation to a bylaw that my brother and I were heading up this movement against this bylaw, the Emergency Management Act, which really removed in the state of an emergency all of your rights other than your right to life. That was the only thing that was not drafted into the bill, but everything else, your right to your own conduct, because they can conscript you, whether that be into a labor camp or whatever to help with the emergency, your property, real or not real property, right? So your vehicle's gone, your house, oh, that's perfect. We need it for the emergency. It becomes a staging ground, whatever it may be. It was the martial law bill is what it was. The only thing it didn't write in there is that they could remove your life if you opposed, right? But you can go to jail if you opposed. So anyways, we went and we fought this bill. And to get this thing off the books, we're good people out here. This whole county, when emergency rises, out of the goodness of our hearts, we unify and we work together. Get this piece of junk off of the books now. We don't need the government coming in and telling us what or how we should be doing and interfering with the process. Get it off the books now, right? Like, this is fully tyrannical. So they did. We won. I come home at about noon, absolutely excited about the fact that we just actually won and that there was standing room only. About 300 people showed up. Actually, in fact, I think there's a news clip that we have on that. Is there not?
There certainly is. Let's play that right now.
Sure.
For joining us. Cheryl is off tonight. It was standing room only in Cardston County Council chambers this morning as hundreds of Southern Albertans voiced their opinion on a controversial bylaw.
It comes following a Facebook and written campaign to raise awareness about the county's emergency management plan, one that some residents say violates their fundamental freedoms. Shannon Greer now with more on the bylaw and council reaction.
Tempers flare as Southern Albertans raise both their voices and concerns to Cardston County Council about a controversial bylaw.
It infringes upon our very, very base fundamental rights and freedoms and liberties as human beings.
Council making the decision to repeal bylaw 562, saying they're going back to the drawing board to come up with a new plan before taking it to the public, something residents say they couldn't be happier about.
The meeting was wildly successful in the sense that the fight for freedom received a huge victory.
Councillors say they expect to bring the new bylaw forward within the next month or so. Shannon Greer, Global News.
Cardston councillors say it was great to see such a big turnout and are pleased residents are taking part in the democratic process.
So this ended up making headlines. Like it ended up, Alberta-wide radio shows and stuff like that it started discussing it. I think it's a Dave Rutherford show was discussing it, and they were trying to bash on what we were doing. Our next step, we are taking it on in the municipalities around us. We were going to go take them all on, and then we were going to go at the province because it was coming down through the province. So that was fully what we were anticipating on doing, and the media was not like that media article did not actually depict how heated it was. Mm-hmm. I don't know why they pulled the certain clips that they did, because they were lousy. Like it started off really lousy and dismal. There were some really powerful moments that would have highlighted the vitriol and the anger that the 300 people had, that they had way too many people show up. They could not put it in the county council room. So they actually put us into a mechanic shop, and that's why they had the makeshift table set up and stuff for the county councillors. It was absolutely heated, and it sent a message, and it became discussed in the Alberta legislature, and we were about to take it to the province. But unfortunately, we would never get there, even with all of the forward movement, because Monday rolls around. Like that's on a Monday morning that happens. Monday about noon, I come home with the good news for my wife, and my wife is not happy. Now, remember, she's 4.5 months pregnant. She's sleep deprived because she stayed up with Ezekiel the night before. And so she says to me, because now I have to go to a meeting at Truehope because we postponed the regular morning meeting that we'd have on the Monday for this particular meeting. Now we're going to go to meet at Truehope. And so she says, that's when she informs me that he had a bad night. And she says, do we need to take him to the doctor? And I said, well, I went and looked at him and said, I don't see a need. He's not vomiting. He doesn't have diarrhea. He has no signs of infection. Like there's nothing going on outwardly. He looks uncomfortable. Like you take him to the doctor and what are they going to say? Well, he's uncomfortable. Like what do you diagnose him with? Like that was my concern, is that he's not severe. He's not severe enough. Like, yeah, I get it. You're 4.5 months pregnant. Yeah, you're sleep deprived. You're not happy. I wasn't around this morning to help out when typically I would have had you had a bad night. Mm-hmm. And so she says, I'm going to call the midwife, because we're seeing a midwife at that point in time. But the midwife at that point in time is a practicing nurse, 9 years in the emergency room at that point. And I'll see if she can come out early, because she's supposed to come out this week. I'll have her come out early and take a look. So she does. And while I'm at the Truehope meeting, and she comes and takes a look, and she brings her stethoscope. She brings her blood pressure monitoring equipment and all that, checks out all of his vitals. All of his vitals come back normal, nothing wrong. And listens to his breathing, nothing wrong. So nothing like he had with the croup. And here's where it gets unfortunate, because she states, well, let me back up here. About 2 to 3 weeks previous to this, but to her visiting, there was a case of meningitis that had come in that she had dealt with. And so it's on her mind, right? No, at that point in time, you say meningitis to me. I'm pretty educated in relation to natural health, but what? Like, I don't know what that is, right? Like, okay, I've heard the term, but I actually don't know what it is. So she makes mention to my wife about, well, maybe you want to look into meningitis, not because of any particular set of symptoms, but because it's fresh on her mind, and she can't identify by looking at them. There's nothing that stands out, right? That that's going on. So she makes mention of it. And this would set the stage for a disastrous situation. She recommends that we get him onto electrolytes. We do. We start him on electrolytes that Monday evening, and he has a good sleep that Monday night, sleeps well, wakes up in the morning. We had some lawyer's papers that we had to go sign in relation to a real estate deal that we just sold our house in the previous town that we lived in. And we didn't know, like, if we default on that, what would happen or whatnot. And so my wife and I are debating back and forth. Do we take him to Lethbridge? Do we not? He's already progressed. This is good. Do we want to potentially compromise that progress by taking him in a vehicle? And we opted, let's take him in the vehicle. Let's make him comfy in there, whatever. And so we did. And we said, while we're there, we might as well go to the naturopathic doctor and just get some immune boosting tincture just to continue on with the progress so that he gets better, that he's up and running in a day or two or however that looks. Well, by the time that we left Lethbridge, I had fallen asleep in the back of the vehicle with him while my wife was, she dropped by the superstore real quick just to grab a handful of groceries. I fell asleep and he woke me up playing with my lip, doing the little flip, blah, 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 that type of thing, right? And so now, okay, you're not just consumed with yourself. He's becoming a little more playful, whatever. That's cool. Anyway, so we get home and he goes down for a really restful nap. Now, at that point in time, there was no display of discomfort or anything like that. But before he does so, he drinks on his own accord about a cup of this electrolyte drink. Right. Okay. So great. My wife at that point in time, I said, hey, look, like, 'cause she was going to not go to this church event. I said, just go. He's fine. Like, look, he's like, tomorrow he's probably gonna be up and running. Like, everything's fine. Like he's fully relaxed. He's chilled out. He just, he's hydrated, like all that, because he just drank all that electrolyte drink. He's doing great. So she goes to this church event, but then something happens. I know that I don't want to show up too much time because I could literally go on, for an hour on this. So just Cole's Note version. He wakes up from his nap, and I'm the only one there with him. And my 4-year-old son is off playing somewhere at that point in time. And actually, I think at that point in time, I just put him to bed. My son wakes up, Ezekiel, and he's got this breathing pattern, and it's curious to me. I can't make heads and tails of it. I can't tell whether to be concerned or not. But he's got this breathing pattern, and my wife phones it around the same time just to check up. She does that regardless. Just see how's the kids, right? Is dad actually taking care of them, right? And so she phones and says, "How's he doing?" I said, "Well, he's fine. He woke up from his nap. I gave him some more fluids." So, but he's got this like curious breathing pattern, right? But he seems fine. Like, he's cognizant and everything. Like, everything's fine. Like, I don't know what it is. It's nothing like the croup. But it was just curious to me because it didn't come with any other concerns surrounding it. Everything else seemed normal with him. And so he goes back to sleep. My wife comes home from her activity. She decided to, when I said that, not because I raised any alarm, but it was basically the end of her activity anyways, this church activity. So she came home and so we're observing him while he's sleeping, saying, like, what do we do? Like, what is there any, do we need to be concerned? What is this? And before we had a chance to really analyze it over the next 15, 20 minutes, to determine, do we take him to the doctor? Like, what, like, we just don't know. He rapidly, digressed, and just went into, like, to the point that he's struggling to breathe. And at that point in time, I phoned my dad and say, hey, look, we're going to take him to the hospital. Just so you know, can you pray for us, type of thing. And anyways, as I'm on the phone, he stops breathing. And I'm like, Dad, I got to go. I got to phone 911. My dad's panicking, whatever. And I got to go. So I get on the phone with 911, and by the time I get off the phone with them, or by the time I get back I have to run 75 yards down my driveway to get him an address. I run back. I come in the house, and he's breathing again. And my wife had patted on his back and gave him one rescue breath, and he coughed up some mucus and fluid. So I'm thinking he did aspirate on some of the liquids I gave him, and maybe that was what the struggle was. And I'm like, I just phoned 911 for no reason, right? So now I'm feeling embarrassed because I've never phoned 911 in my life. I'm thinking, what is this, right? Now I'm in a traumatic situation, and my brain isn't operating 100% clearly. I'm thinking, what do I do with this, right? Embarrassment. He's doing fine. What's going on? Whatever. Anyway, so we decided, okay, hold off on the ambulance. We're going to drive him in because an ambulance is half an hour away, or so we thought. So we start to drive him into the hospital. After about 20 minutes, it took us to get our other son out of bed and all that. And he's fine. He's stabilized and he's breathing on his own. We take him into the vehicle. We get a mile down the road and he stops breathing again. He ends up in an ambulance almost all the way to Cardston. We met up with an ambulance on the highway a few minutes out. And we'd find out later on that there was some major issues in relation to that ambulance. And I won't go into too much detail. But what happens is he goes for an extended period of time without oxygen. And we're not aware of this at the time. And he gets to the hospital. We get to the hospital separate from him because we weren't allowed into the ambulance. And he's fully hooked up on life support. They airlift him to Calgary, and their intention was to get him there as fast as possible. And so we're not with him. They told us to go separately. So we went home, we packed, we drove all the way up to Calgary, and we're waiting. He's not there. We're thinking, what the heck? Like, they were supposed to get him there as fast as possible. What happened? Well, we don't actually know what happened, and I'll get into that a little bit later on. Not today, but a different episode. And so anyways, what happens is we get there and we wait for probably over an hour before he arrives. And we're told that he's put into a medically induced coma. And we're thinking, okay, they got it under control though. They can fix this. Well, the nurse who was also the midwife, worked out of that hospital that we took him to. She arrived there as well. And she had some discussion with the doctor as well, that she'd been there the day before at our house and had assessed him and everything. And that's when the meningitis narrative became injected, because they didn't know. They had no clue. Now, somebody dies from meningitis, it's pretty clear cut, like the symptoms and everything that lead up to it. He didn't have that. Like, you don't just go like look symptom free for a few hours, you're fine, whatever. And then all of a sudden you have this breathing pattern and you stop breathing. It doesn't work that way. That's not the way meningitis works. If you're to stop breathing, it's because of the intracranial pressure that takes place from the infection of the meninges to the point that you're compressing the brainstem. And when you compress the brainstem, that's what controls all of your breathing and your heart rate and everything like that. That's when you'd end up with a shutdown. So you'd end up with a child probably going into seizure. That's generally the case, as well as incredibly painful situation from the intracranial pressure. Like we're talking the worst headache that you'll ever have from all that pressure to the point that you're compressing your brainstem. He didn't have it. He had none of the manifestation of bacterial meningitis or meningitis, but that's when the narrative began. So he's up at Children's Hospital in Calgary, and he's struggling. Not struggling. He's on life support for 5 days. So now here we go. This is now, we get there. This is all on Tuesday. We get there late Tuesday, but actually early morning hours of Wednesday, we get there. And we're up. We'd been up since 7 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday to go to Lethbridge to get the paper signed for the lawyer, or the lawyer's paper signed. And we hadn't been asleep yet. And now we're in the early hours of Wednesday at Alberta Children's Hospital. And we're trying to work with the doctors. We're trying to figure it out. We're giving them all of the information possible that we have so that they can have a clue as to what's going on, because they still can't diagnose anything. He's got a CT scan. They rule out meningitis with the CT scan, but yet they didn't tell us that they ruled out meningitis. So they're still asking us about meningitis. They're saying there's evidence of seizures, but they can't provide that evidence, and that evidence would never be provided. But they're trying to get us to identify when he would have had a seizure. It's like they're trying to build this narrative. Now, we don't see it for what it is at that point in time. We're extremely sleep deprived, and we think that they're just trying to help out. And we're trying to help out because we want our son to come out of there alive. And so all of a sudden, about, 6 o'clock in the evening on the Wednesday. Now, my wife hasn't slept at all. I think I had a brief nap, right? So now we're almost, we're going into, 36 hours of no sleep. And we're informed that there's going to be an investigation. I'm thinking, why is there going to be an investigation? Like, what did we do wrong? Like, really, like, what did we do? Like, we didn't know that anything like this shocked the heck out of us. We thought he was going to be up and running the next day. Instead, he's in an ambulance and he's being airlifted. Like, there's going to be an investigation. Child Family Services is coming. They're going to interview you. Okay. Really? Does this have to happen? I've heard the horror stories about Child Family Services. Really? Yeah, it has to happen. The doctor says, yeah, it has to happen because the death took place outside of a hospital setting, so it has to happen. Okay, sure, fine. 10 o'clock rolls around in the night. And there's Child and Family Services. But at the same time, we see 2 police officers also. We're thinking, why is there police officers here? There's almost nobody else in the PQ here, the pediatric intensive care unit. Why is there police officers here? And so, we're doing business, walking back and forth down the hall and having to pass them. They're eyeing us up, but thinking, what is this? So anyways, we go and meet with Child Family Services and sit down, met with them for probably 45 minutes and just laid out what had led up to that. And okay, we part ways, 11 o'clock at night. Now there's 6 police officers in the pediatric intensive care unit. I'm thinking 6 police officers, 2 would have done the job unless they're looking to arrest me. What is this? Why is there 6 police officers congregating around the nurse's desk at the pediatric intensive care unit? And they introduce one of the social workers that works in the hospital comes and introduces me. And they said, yeah, we're going to need to meet with you, but we're working out some jurisdiction issues, blah, 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 whatever. By the time midnight rolls around, they got the jurisdiction issues figured out. And we're now meeting with an RCMP officer. Very nice individual, but at midnight, right? And now, mind you, we're coming on now, not quite to 48 hours of no sleep, but almost. So my wife goes and sits down with them. 2 o'clock rolls around. 2:30 rolls around. Finally, I'm in with them. Now, middle of the night, right? Now, remember, this isn't just, we're now almost a full 2 days of no real sleep. And now I'm meeting with them till 4 a.m. And I'm trying to be as truthful as possible because I got nothing to hide. And coherent as possible, except that's a real challenge given the fact that nobody in a traumatic situation like that alone, coupled with the fact that I was incredibly sleep deprived, would be able to be fully coherent and fully truthful in relation to relaying what was reality with the previous situation all up to that. So that lays the groundwork for what would become a decade-long court battle, which we'll get into a little bit later here. But things persist. I finally get some sleep after 4 a.m, getting all of that done and over with. The next day, the Child Family Services comes back and they want to interview my 4-year-old son on his own. By that point in time, the social worker out of the hospital had heard what had taken place the night before and the fact that we were with the police till 4 a.m. And she said, what do you want me to tell him? I said, tell him to take a hike. She says, absolutely. Right? Because she's fully on board. You parents have absolutely gone through the ringer. Your son is on his deathbed. They're saying that he could go into cardiac arrest at any moment and that they won't be able to resuscitate him. And now you have Child Family Services, breathing down your neck, as well as the police and all, just inhumane harassment. Yeah. And so she tells them, take a hike, basically, right? So they go away and we never hear anything from them again. But now things go on until Sunday. So he's been in Alberta Children's Hospital for 5 days. And they're persistently encouraging us to do organ donation. And we're saying, why? Our goal is to make sure that he's alive and out of here, but they're persisting with this. 3 or 4 times they come and harass us about it. We're like, no, we're not going to donate his organs. That's not where our mind is. How do we get him well? How do we correct what's going on? He's not showing any brain activity. We're thinking, what the heck? Well, why not? What's going on here? And now we're thinking in our ignorance, well, what else would have done this but meningitis, right? Maybe he does have brain death from meningitis. How did this work, right? But the symptoms didn't line up with it. And that would be something that I would sit there and think about after the fact and say, wait a minute, the narrative, it's not fitting, right? And then we'd then find the evidence in years to come that supported that they hid from us. They hid absolute pertinent evidence from us. When we get into the courts, they withheld a lot of evidence. So then what would happen is my son would pass away. They'd pull life support at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the Sunday. And we were just left completely devastated. All the hope that we'd had, looking for a miracle, hoping for it, it just, didn't happen. And we're left with so many questions, so much confusion, to the point that immediately, and normally I wouldn't be acting that quickly in this type of situation, but I wanted closure. I wanted an understanding. I want to know what happened here. So I order an autopsy report, and I'm expecting to get it within about 6 weeks, right? So now this is March 18th. Right, of 2012, and I'm hoping that by the time that May rolls around, that I know what my son passed away from. Well, we're left in just this dark, dismal place, and let me tell you, we got to understand the need for both spiritual and physical nourishment, and that if we didn't keep up with any of them within this situation, things got really dark for us really fast. It took about a month before I'd return back to work and start traveling again, which was a bit of a tough situation. And I actually ended up spending a lot of time with my with Colette and Ezra coming on work trips with me. So the dynamics changed quite a bit, that they would actually come with me so that we'd remain together as a family. Yeah. And the reason being is that it was just so lonely at home. Even though there's three of us, there's this silence, this deafening silence where, you know, you hear your son playing with little dinky cars and stuff like that, your 4-year-old son, and normally it'd be accompanied with some interchange with the 1.5-year-old son and laughter and whatever. And it's just silence. It's just that you hear the car moving by itself. That's it. And, you know, our wake up call that we normally get at about 6 a.m, because our son Ezekiel would wake up before anybody else. And it was like clockwork. Like you know when he's up, because all of a sudden you just hear the door go, and then you hear this, and he'd run to the kitchen for some reason. I'm not sure why. And then he'd run back to our room and then jump in bed. And it was like clockwork. And you could tell he was only on the balls of his feet as he's just cruising down the hallway, right? Just absolutely cute. And now you're not getting that. And you're waking up on your own and you're thinking, this has got to be a nightmare, right? And then you realize, no, it's reality. Your son's gone. Your son's gone. And it just wouldn't go away. And it was a very troubling time for all of us, right? To navigate through that, because everybody's schedule is different. It's upset. It's changed. Your whole life has changed. There's a void that can't be filled. So we're going through this, and I'm seeking for that closure. I want closure. And it wouldn't be till about the end of November, I get a phone call from the medical examiner's office stating that Ezekiel's death was vaccine preventable. Now, we didn't vaccinate our children. I'm thinking, vaccine preventable? Like, what was it, right? Like, and they're saying it was meningitis. Oh, okay, it's meningitis, bacterial meningitis, vaccine preventable. I said, what vaccine was it? And the guy said, I actually don't know. You'll have to wait for the autopsy report to arrive, but it's coming. I said, okay, thank you. It arrives. So, you know, here we are, probably the last week of November of 2012, maybe first week of December, you know, over 7 months after the fact. And I finally got the autopsy report in my hands. And there's part of me that doesn't want to open it. I don't want to revisit it, but I want closure. I want to understand what my son passed away from. And I'm trusting that I'm going to get some answers out of this. I read it and I was left with more questions than answers. When it started talking about the fact that they had to use non-clinical research methodology in order to establish that my son had bacterial meningitis, that rose a red flag for me. I said, what is that non-clinical research methodology? That sounds pretty out there. Like, you know, bacterial meningitis is pretty clear cut. Like, you should be able to establish that fairly simple, especially if you died from overwhelming bacterial meningitis. There's going to be an overwhelming amount of evidence. So I've got these questions, but I'm looking at it, I'm saying, why does the topic of vaccines keep on coming out in just the first few paragraphs? Within the first few paragraphs, I'm looking at this and saying, look, I'm trying to use some deductive reasoning here and saying, why? Why is that being threaded in there? Because everything that's written in here is for a very clear-cut purpose. Mm-hmm. Why do they keep on threading that back in to establish, to over-establish the role of vaccines in this? And so I got concerned. And I said, you know what? They're going to charge us. And they're going to charge us and make a vaccine trial out of this. Because I can't see any other reasoning as to why that would be within the way it's worded, the way it's been placed in there, why that information would be in there in relation to this Haemophilus influenza B vaccine. Because what they found in their non-clinical research methodology is that they found DNA fragmentation of a form of Haemophilus influenza, but they couldn't tell what type it was. Why? Because there wasn't enough evidence for anything for them to establish that it was even Haemophilus influenza. But they found some DNA fragmentation, but they couldn't tell whether it's Haemophilus A or influenza A, B, C, D, E, or any of the hundreds or thousands, they don't even know, of non-typables. But now they're saying the Haemophilus influenza B vaccine would have fixed the situation or prevented it from even arising. So I'm thinking they're going to charge us. And January rolls around. no charges. End of January, thinking, I was just being paranoid. Like, oh man, like that's the last thing that we need after going through all of this garbage. Like we're still trying to heal from this.
Mm-hmm.
February rolls around. We come back, second weekend of February. We come back to our house. We've been at a wedding, and we see tire tracks in the snow, fresh tracks. Who's been at our place? We see footprints going to the back of every single vehicle there to the license plate. Thinking, why is somebody looking at my license plates? I see a set of prints go up to the door and back. Okay. So then I walk to the door. I see a card tucked in there from the RCMP to give them a call. Now, they tried to phone me the week before, and I just didn't feel like answering it. I just didn't want to hear what they had to say. So I didn't answer it. And then my stepmom phones me and says, hey, the RCMP is trying to get hold of you. I said, whatever, right? Like, if it's that important, they'll come and see me, whatever. Mm-hmm. Well, they did attempt to come see me. And so I pull the card out and it says, give Sergeant McCoy a call. All right. So I give Sergeant McCoy a call out of the Raymond detachment, which is not in our jurisdiction, mind you. Different jurisdiction. That's the jurisdiction of Truehope. So anyways, I give him a call. And he says, hey, the Crown has some recommendations. Now, this is about 5 p.m. He says, hey, the Crown has some recommendations. I said, okay. It's like, can you tell them to me over the phone? He says, no, come meet me in person tomorrow. I'm like, you sure you don't want to tell them over the phone? I just really don't feel like, sitting on this for the rest of the evening. I'd rather just, no. He says, no, just come in tomorrow. Okay. Now, by this point in time, my wife's had the next baby. So now we have little Ephraim, right? And at this point in time, he's, what is he? 7 months old, approximately. And so we go in, my wife, 7-month-old baby, and myself. And we go and we sit in this interrogation room, and he had no recommendations. Crown had no recommendations. Immediately just supplied us with the charges. You've been charged with failing to provide the necessaries of life. And at this point in time, I've got a little bit of understanding of law, and I know that that's a pretty serious one, but I didn't know exactly what it was. So I'm thinking, this is not good. My wife starts bawling. The sergeant's gloating over the fact that he just charged us. I'm thinking, what's wrong with this guy? Like, no compassion whatsoever. We lose a child. You've got a mother here with her 7-month-old baby, and you're happy over the fact that you're charging us, and then even going so far as to say that, there's case law, basically surrounding this and saying basically we got you and you're going to jail, right? And this is what he's basically communicating, showing that he's more than just an investigator in it, that he has a vested interest in it. I'm thinking, what is wrong with this guy? Like, this is twisted. So I get home and I check my criminal code and I look at it. I look up failing to provide necessaries of life. I'm like, up to 5 years. I'm like, my golly, this is a bad one. Like, this is, akin to like manslaughter or whatever. Like, this is not good.
Serious. And
so I'm like, okay, how do we afford this? What do we do? Like, we need to get lawyers. So we fundraised had a lot of support in Southern Alberta here, set up a big fundraiser, big event in a school gym with bouncy castles and a big kids event in memorial of Ezekiel. Meanwhile, charging admission for it all and using that to fundraise to afford a retainer for lawyers, because we didn't have all our money was tied up in assets at that point in time. So then we started, posting quads and motorhome for sale and all that type of stuff. Like, we're trying to drum up as much money as possible because we know this is not going to be cheap. This is a serious, this is not a case I can self-represent on. At least that's my mindset at the time. So we end up hiring some lawyers. The first thing that we were looking for was, are we going to have a lawyer that has our back? And I'm of the mindset they're going vaccine on this. This is going to be a vaccine trial. And so anyways, we hired 2 lawyers. They were okay. And then we're like, you know what? We know that Sean Buckley, who we've worked with extensively over the years and that represented Truehope well, has a very similar mindset. And, maybe we should hire him. And so I reached out to him, and by October, I believe it's October, if not a month or 2, give or take, of 2013, we'd hired him. And so now fast forward. First of all, in the communication we have with them, I said, hey, Sean, I think they're going vaccine on this. I'm pretty sure that they're going to make this a vaccine trial. And he laughed at me and he said, no, he says they can't do that. There's no precedent in Canada for them to do that. You don't need to worry about that. I'm like, okay. And the only question that's left in my head is, well, how do they get a precedent? Like, surely there has to be something, right?
Has to be a first case.
Right. And so he's reassuring me. I'm like, okay, well then what is this about? Like, it's not making sense to me. Like, none of this. Like, they're grasping at straws because they got nothing on us. Like, generally those cases, and I'll get into that in probably the next episode, but those cases are reserved for negligent parents failing to provide necessaries of life. And all the evidence, like, we're not negligent. In fact, my wife is like overly doting, like beyond. So you're not going to get that out of the evidence. And so anyways, fast forward to June 2014, where we begin to see what this case was actually all about and where it would go and how they were exploiting the death of my son to remove parental rights all across Canada and remove medical choice all across Canada. And it would be a beautiful predecessor to what we would then experience in 2020, 2021, 2022, and up until now. And how this would serve to set the stage and a dangerous precedent that they would be able to exploit on all Canadians. And so we get into a preliminary hearing. This is like the first hearing. Now, mind you, by the way, they gave us disclosure. They charged us in February 12th, 2013. By May, we're in the courts, and the Crown is scrambling to get disclosure to us. They weren't prepared. And it was deficient disclosure. They gave us 450 pages of medical files. We would find out later on that they had omitted almost a third of the medical files that told a much different story than what fit their narrative. They never anticipated I was going to go to court because they had me pegged as a free man, sovereign citizen, which is interesting because sovereign citizen is an oxymoron. You can't be a citizen and be sovereign at the same time. But they had me pegged as one of these individuals, and they were anticipating full out that I was never going to get charged in the first place, that they'd have to do it in a roundabout way, and that I'd never show up to any court hearing. Now also I'm showing up to court hearings with lawyers, and they're having to give disclosure that they didn't have prepared because they never thought that I would ever ask for the disclosure. So they thought they had a clear-cut case, a dirty case with a deficient story, a deficient narrative that would never be challenged. And they were hoping to make some serious national media out of this, which we found from the disclosure afterwards in the police investigation, on the heels of Meads versus Meads, which was the largest Freeman case legally that took place, with a serious precedent being established by ACJ Rook, Assistant Chief Justice Rook, who oversaw the Southern Alberta area of the judiciary. So he's over this case. He's appointing judges for this case. And so now we're showing up to court and they're scrambling to get us the evidence. So now we end up in a preliminary hearing to find out what's the narrative that they're going to go with. What does our defense need to be? And so we find ourselves there in June 2014. Now, at this point in time, I'm still struggling to get enough money for the court case. So I set up a fundraiser the week before. And it was amazing. The amount of support that we got. We fundraised, we anticipated it's going to be $30,000 for the preliminary hearing. And we fundraised $23,000, give or take some change, right? So we end up with all this money, but I'm thinking we're still $7,000 short. We're going to owe Sean. We have to pay him. We get into this preliminary hearing. Actually, before we get there, I'm just going to quickly digress. What was amazing is by the time the preliminary hearing was done, Sean submits a bill and it was less than the $30,000. It was actually, I think, within $100 of what we had fundraised. And we said, hallelujah, hallelujah. Like, how do we get that close? Right? Like we're sitting there in a deficient ingratitude state, in a sense, saying it is nice that we got the 23,000, but we need 30,000. And we had everything we needed. We might have had to throw about $100 out of our own pocket in that very moment. And so anyways, we get into the preliminary hearing, and this is where it becomes interesting. Because now we have doctors and the medical pathologists, the forensic pathologists getting up there, and they're all regurgitating the same vaccine narrative. They're all focusing in on it as if these doctors were vaccinologists or immunologists even, which they weren't. None of them are experts in that field. They can't actually even speak authoritatively to vaccines because they're not properly educated on it. And so they're talking about it statistically, how they've seen a major reduction in Haemophilus influenza related meningitis, how it's extremely rare today because, well, we just don't see it because of the introduction of the Haemophilus influenza B vaccine, that somehow all of the other forms of Haemophilus influenza have gone down as well, which is an absolute blatant lie, which we'll get into with our expert evidence in a different episode. But they were absolutely just lying and just trying to pull the wool over our eyes, anticipating that we would never get expert witnesses that would actually contradict and say, no, this is completely bogus. What they're saying is completely opposite to the truth. And here's the stats on it. But then we're hearing all of this. And finally, Sean Buckley stands up and objects. And I'll actually, I guess that's on my end here. I'll just share that real quick. So here's the transcript right here. So Mr. Buckley, our lawyer, Mr. Lebrenz is the Crown prosecutor. Mr. Buckley, Sean Buckley, stands up, says, Your Honor, now this is mid-examination, direct examination of the forensic pathologist who wrote the autopsy report and wrote all of this pro-vaccine information in there. So now my lawyer, Sean, stands up and is objecting and just trying to get some clarification, because this is just this recurrent theme. And he's saying, what's the relevance? So he says, Your Honor, just because I don't want to get off track, I'm not aware that the Crown's theory of the case is that, immunization or non-immunization leads anyway to any liability for this charge. Okay, so how is the charge of failing to provide necessaries of life connected to immunization or non-immunization? I could be corrected, but I'm just wondering if we're getting on a tangent. And he's interrupted by the Crown prosecutor. Crown prosecutor says, no, that's definitely part of my view in this case in relation to the immunization aspect. Okay. So then Sean says, okay, well, that's news to the defense. Thank you. So it's just very interesting, because then if we're going to have, just so my friend is aware, on the record, when we get to a trial, it's going to be a very long trial, basically on the merits of vaccination will now become an issue at the trial, just so my friend is on notice. Okay. So fortunately, Sean and I had this discussion beforehand, and I relayed that I think they're going this way. So he's already brought to mind. So he's able to answer to the fact that we're gonna take him to task on it. We're gonna challenge the aspects of vaccination. And at that point in time, I'm saying, I'm glad that we hired Sean Buckley, because almost any other lawyer, we interviewed another lawyer, or he interviewed us and said, well, what would you do in this situation if they ask you if you'd vaccinate your child for polio, right? And I'm like, why are we talking about this? And, this is non-relevant, but, and he'd say, well, what is the answer going to be? I'm going to be absolutely not. Absolutely not. Don't care. Don't care what they have to say. I'm not going to vaccinate my child for polio, right? And so he's bringing that up because he was pro-vaccine and basically chastising us for the fact that, that could have been a potential that led up to this, because he was aware of the autopsy report that I had in my own possession. And so I'm glad we hired Sean, because he was willing to make a bold statement like that, hey, we're going to attack the merits of vaccination. So now we see at this point in time what the agenda is. Now we know what we're up against, fortunately, and that we need to hire expert witnesses in relation to this. Now, at that point in time, lunch break comes around. Sean goes and meets with Mr. Lebrenz. Sean comes back to me after, because typically we're eating lunch together at that point in time, but he comes back to me after because it was a little bit of a more lengthy meeting. And he says, what they're looking to do is establish a precedent in Canada that if you don't vaccinate as a parent and harm or death occurs to your child due to something that they deem to be vaccine preventable, that you as a parent will be held criminally liable. So now they're attaching criminal liability to your choice of whether to vaccinate or not to vaccinate. And they're gonna scare the heck out of parents all across Canada while they display us on public trial before everybody, right? So now we know what the agenda is of the trial. And now we would spend the next almost actually more than a year and a half. We would spend about the next 20 months preparing for what was going to be a very lengthy trial with a very strange outcome in multiple ways, which I think we'll be covering in our next episode.
Absolutely, yeah. And what we'll do is that's kind of concludes episode 3 here. So thank you so much for that, David. I know that's not a an easy topic for you to talk about. And yeah, we're coming up to a 2-hour point here, and yeah, we could certainly speak about Ezekiel's situation and the days leading up to it and around it. We could speak for hours and hours about that because there's so many details, but we will cover more of that in part 4. But I just wanted to make the point here that this case, and we're going to talk more about it in episode 4, is incredibly important for the freedoms and choices of parents within Canada. As the Crown lawyers told Sean, that they've been looking for a case like this where they can basically blame parents for not giving the necessities of life, a vaccine, to their child, and looking for a precedent to bring this up further in court. And I'm a very skeptical individual myself, and I know for a fact that Big Pharma has got a huge impact on government, and the fact that it would be incredible business within Canada for pharmaceutical companies if vaccines were mandated, if childhood vaccines particularly were mandated. I know that there are many states in the US where if you want to go to school, if you want to have a doctor, you absolutely 100% have to follow the CDC schedule, which I think at this point is like 70 vaccines in 18 years, which is gone up from 5 vaccines, I think, in like 30-40 years, which is just mind-blowing. But it would be incredibly, just to put this out there as an idea for people who might be skeptical, who might not be, but it would be an incredible business opportunity if the Canadian government made it law that they had to consume, that individuals, especially kids, had to consume annually certain products sold by a pharmaceutical company. That would double their profits from 20 years within a like it'd be I can't even fathom the amount of money that would absolutely reap on Canadian taxpayers. But it has to be something that's in the playbook of Big Pharma, because they've been able to do that in other countries around the world. And I just think about this case as, sure, it's involving yourself, it's involving Truehope, but this case is significant for parents all across Canada and arguably across the world, because this case would make national news, and it's incredibly important. And the fact that I think the stupidity from the face of Health Canada and the Crown that they went with this angle with such pathetic evidence is quite unbelievable. And the story will certainly unfold in part 4 about how this goes. I'm not going to give anything away because it's really quite unbelievable what happens going forward. But yeah, I think just people need to recognize how important this is for parents within Canada.
Yeah, and there'd be a reason why the media would make this such a sensation internationally. Without going into too much detail, we'll cover this in the next episode. But I mean, I was hearing from people in Australia, I was hearing from people in Sweden, that they were seeing it in their local news. They were seeing, not my mugshot, but pictures of myself and my wife. And there was a time that I couldn't go into a gas station for about a month without anticipating to see myself on the front page of a newspaper there. That's just how prolific they made it. And yet there was other egregious cases taking place around the same time of truly failing to provide necessities of life that included like RCMP officer or whatnot, busted, locking up a child in the basement, all that type of stuff, and depriving them of food. And yet that wasn't seeing the light of day. And yet our case was literally being just disseminated across the world. And for what reason? And that's what I guess we'll cover next time, is the rationale behind it and where it all led. But it was just phenomenal what they were doing. And yeah, with such a lousy story, but they had to trust the media to tell the distorted story so many times that the vast majority of people believed it to be the truth.
Yeah. And most people in 2024, they just have to recognize that there's a incredible relationship between industry, government, and media, especially in Canada. It's like quite remarkable, and we've seen that over the last few years emphasized a million times. So be very interesting to see what happens in part 4 when we continue this story. We're not even halfway through it, and it's quite the epic saga. It's quite remarkable, and I'm certainly enjoying this whole process. But we're going to finish up there. That's part 3 on.
I'll cut you off. I'm going to cut you off for 1 second. There's one pertinent little piece of information. I think there's probably a lot of the audience that, because I know that there's a lot of people locally and whatnot. When we got charged, they came up and they say, it's just a vendetta. They're coming after you because of what your father did to Health Canada before, right? They recognize that. I think there's a pertinent piece of information that we're going to lose sight on because we're not bringing it up in the next episode. But I'd accidentally screen shared it when we were in the studio beforehand in relation to the fact that with the disclosure we received, Health Canada was prodding around during the investigation and had been making inquiries with the RCMP. And the question needs to be asked, why is Health Canada taking an interest in the death of my son? And for what motive? Right? Like what are they going to do with that? So that was pretty interesting when we discovered that Health Canada also had their paws in on this. So you can only imagine how many departments are working behind the scenes to try to set a nationwide precedent that's going to change how parents parent all across the country.
Incredible stuff. Well, we certainly look forward to part 4, but that finishes up part 3. Tragedy strikes again, and next week we'll be coming at you with part 4, which is titled "The Nefarious Vaccine Agenda," and everything there will become clear. But that is it for this special series of the Truehope Family Files here on Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. We'll see you next week.